Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Carlotta Fioretti, and I am a scientific officer at the Joint Research Center, which is the in-house scientific and knowledge service of the European Commission. Very welcome to everybody to the conference of today, a place-based approach to migrant integration. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this conference that has been organized by the Joint Research Center in collaboration with the Regional Studies Association. What's the aim of today? Well, the first aim is to present you the results of a recent publication, a report that it's titled as the conference, a place-based approach to migrant integration. This is the result of a project, an exploratory research activity, which I had the pleasure to coordinate, and which saw the collaboration of many colleagues. Some of them are with us today, and they will present some of the findings of this research. So just a quick information for you. This is a Zoom webinar, so you are not allowed to use your camera or your microphone, but there are two functions that you can use. There is the chat box. Please use it in order to make any kind of comment, or if you want to talk also to the technician. And then there is the Q&A function. So please use the Q&A in case you want to ask questions to the speaker. You can do it throughout the entire webinar. We will try to answer during the Q&A session, but maybe speakers will also answer to you directly in the chat box. So let's have a look at the agenda for today. Okay. So first of all, we will have some welcome messages from representatives of the JRC, Alessandro Rainoldi and Dario Tarchi, and from the RSA, Regional Studies Association, Sandrine Labori. After that, the first session will start where we will go, let's say, into the core of the presentation. The session will be chaired by my colleague Paola Proietti. I will present the main findings of the report of the research, and then we will have a discussion together with two representatives of the policy DGs of the European Commission, Grzegorz Gajewski from DG Home and Ottilia Ciobanu from DG Regio. After that, this will be followed by a round table chaired by Laura Colini from Tessere, where different experts from different universities will explain, will go a little bit into the core of the case studies that we develop during our research project. We will hear things from the urban areas of Athens, Paris, Liège, and Venice. And finally, Michele Landabaso, Director of Innovation and Growth of the Joint Research Center, will close the conference. So again, I don't want to waste too much time. So again, very welcome to the conference. I want to thanks for joining us, Alessandro Rainoldi, Head of Urban and Territorial Development Unit at the Joint Research Center. And please, Alessandro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Carlotta, and thanks a lot to all those who are connected now, and hopefully will connect during the conference. Carlotta, you have made a very clear introduction on the background of this activity and the report, so I would not spend many more words on this. I would just like to say from our point of view, so the point of view of a team dealing with territorial development and trying to understand territorial dynamics, trends, scenarios, and put this knowledge at the service of better policy making at European level. That this is an experimental approach that that we would like to use in order to better understand how place-based policies can actually tackle issues that are related to specific categories of people, so of migrants, and how place-based policies can be integrated with people-based policies in order to better achieve a result in with regard to those people that are targeted by the policy, but also to the places where these people live. I think this is particularly interesting. Well, first of all, because of the situation we're all currently living in, not only with the pandemics, but also with the tensions related to migrant pressure in the European Union, inside and also coming from outside. But also in order to understand how can we help shape trajectories for the recovery and development of the places we live in order for those places to be prepared and well equipped to go through a fruitful and positive development trajectory in the future, but also with the idea of not leaving anyone behind, and I would say putting into value all the resources that every single places have. So I would stop here. I would wish you a very fruitful discussion and exchange. Today, this is as important as the presentation of the report itself. We are here to exchange with you. It's a learning process, and please challenge us, discuss. This also accumulates to the knowledge we all can contribute to. So thank you very much, and back to you, Carlotta.
Thanks a lot, Alessandro. Yes, let's hope to have a very liveful discussion. So I invite you to use the chat box and the Q&A function for that. And now I will pass the floor to Dario Tarchi, acting head of the Demography, Migration and Governance Unit of the Joint Research Center. Please, Dario.
Thank you very much, Carlotta, and good morning to everyone. I hope that my camera is on. Yeah. So thank you very much for your kind invitation to be here today. I'd like to start by thanking the Regional Studies Association for their contribution to the organization of this conference. Then, of course, congratulations in order to Carlotta, Paola, and Guido for the publication of this report and the research they carried out in collaboration with the academic expert that authored the case studies. From my point of view, beyond the fact that the report is absolutely well written and clearly structured, the reason to appreciate it is twofold, basically. So first, its policy relevance. As recalled by the authors, in the last decades, the EU support through funding to enhance both the integration of migrants as an essential part of effective migration management and the balanced sustainable development across the different regions of Europe has become progressively more and more salient. The EU proved particularly crucial to support regional and city authorities in the multi-level governance of territorial cohesion policies and migrant integration policies. So in this context, the Commission has been seeking to consolidate synergies between the different funds targeting territories and targeting specific demographics. With evidence collected also at local level from the field, this report provides an important insights that testify to the logic of combining place-based and people-centered measures to ensure that no one and no place is left behind. Second, this report and the multidisciplinary collaboration behind it is yet another example of how beneficial is cross-fertilization to break silos. In particular, the collaboration between the Knowledge Center on Migration and Demography and the Urban Territorial Development Unit proved to be instrumental to allow innovative analysis of many demographics of European societies at high territorial granularity. If I may say, indeed, closer to the EU side citizens. I could mention several examples of this collaboration, such as the report on the future of cities, the demographic landscape of EU territories, the Atlas of Demography. I'm sure that this collaboration will continue in the future. So I conclude here and just wishing you all a very, very fruitful discussion today. Thank you. Back to you, Carlotta.
Thanks a lot, Dario. Thanks a lot. It was indeed a very interesting interdisciplinary project, and I think that everyone had learned from each other, from the different disciplines. So let's have the last intervention for this first welcoming session. I'm happy to introduce Sandrine Laborie, Director at RSA Europe and Associate Professor at the University of Ferrara. Please, Sandrine.
So hello, everybody. On behalf of the RSA Europe Foundation, I wish to welcome you all in this conference. So the RSA Europe was created in 2015 as a private foundation established in Belgium. After Brexit, the RSA, based in the UK, was worried about its relationship with the European institutions and its members located in the EU. Hence, the creation of RSA Europe, which is independent of the RSA, except that one board member of the RSA also sits on the RSA Europe board in order to ensure collaboration. So I'm delighted to be a director of RSA Europe, which organizes a variety of activities. For example, this year, 30 students and early career researchers attended the summer college for 2 days with master classes from experts, but also the opportunity to present their own work. RSA Europe was also at the EU Regions Week. RSA Europe collaborated with ESOP and URSA to be in 4 EU Regions Week colleges and 10 EU Regions Week university sessions. So the engagement was great. Partners were very happy. There were many participants. And another example is the 3rd Cohesion Policy Conference, which will take place in 2022 in Croatia, organized together with the EU and the Croatian government, gathering academics, management authorities, and EU institutions for 3 days. RSA Europe has also done a number of publications. For instance, it works with the RSA on the Policy Impact book series, including a book I did on the challenges of the smart specialization strategies and Industry 4.0 for less developed region. I thank you for the opportunity to work with you, and I wish you a great conference full of fruitful discussions and insights. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this introduction, and also to tell us about the future events that the RSA will organize. I see that there are a lot of people connected from very different places, so welcome again to everybody. And I think that we can go into the core of our conference. And please, Paola Proietti from the Joint Research Center, I will ask her to turn on her camera and to start the first session. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. Great. So I'm Paola Proietti. As Carlotta said, I work for the Joint Research Center, Unit of Urban and Territorial Development. And today I will be your moderator for this first session. During this session, my colleague Carlotta, that I will introduce in a moment, will provide some insights on the report we have the pleasure of discussing with you today, titled A Place-Based Approach to Migrants Integration, Strategies of Sustainable Urban Development and the Integration of Migrants in Functional Urban Areas. Then we have the pleasure to host in our panel two colleagues from the European Commission, Ms. Ottilia Ciobanu, Policy Officer in the European Commission Department for Regional and Urban Policies, and Mr. Grzegorz Gajewski, Program Manager in DG Migration and Home Affairs. They will provide some reactions to the findings presented by Carlotta, and they will also, of course, mention some of the activities and policies they are working upon in their own Director General. But of course, we would like to have a session which is as much as participative as possible. Therefore, I would reiterate the invite to all the participants, if they have questions, to type them in the chat box. I will try to pick up some of them already from one presentation to another and try to address directly to our speakers. But for all the other questions that there will be no time to address directly after each of the presentation, we will of course have a final moment of discussion after the colleagues will have presented. If you want to address your question specifically to one of the speakers, please mention this in your question so that we can do that. Otherwise, I will try to address them to my colleague as it seems more fit. Therefore, without taking any more time, I would like to ask my colleague Carlotta to switch her camera again. Thank you, Carlotta. Just a couple of words on our speakers. Carlotta is working in the Unit of Urban and Territorial Development. She's of course the one who initiated this research project on migration, and we are very happy that she involved us. Before joining the JRC, Carlotta was a postdoc researcher in Roma Tre University. She graduated in architecture in UAV University of Venice and specialized in urban regeneration at the University of Edinburgh. And finally, she got her PhD in urban policies in Roma Tre University. And today she will provide some insights not only on the findings of the report, but also a bit on the process and on the concept of it. So please, Carlotta, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thank you, Paola. So I will share my screen. Can you see it properly?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So I will give some information on this report, a place-based approach to migrant integration. The report is the outcome of an exploratory research activity that it's called International Migrants in Functional Urban Areas, that as Dario before has already highlighted, has been an interdisciplinary research project to which a different unit of the JRC contributed, but also different experts from a different university. It was a very interesting, let's say, research team. And I want to thank my colleague Paola Proietti and Guido Tintori that together with me, let's say, lead the project. So what is the policy context from which we started? As you probably know, the integration of migrants is a priority of the European Commission. And for this reason, the European Commission provides member states and the local context with the financial instruments and funding schemes which explicitly target the migrant population. An example of that is the Asylum, Migration and Integration Fund. We can say that this type of policy are people-based measure because they explicitly target a category of people that are migrants. At the same time, synergies with other EU funds are encouraged, and the Commission is interested in knowing which EU funds are used to support migrant integration and how. And we work precisely in to try to answer to this question. So we focused on a specific part of the European Union Cohesion Policy, which is the European Regional and Development Fund. Since let's say the previous programming period, so since 2014, the European Regional Development Funds promotes sustainable urban development through integrated strategies that are aimed to tackle the economic, environmental, climate, demographic, and social challenges affecting urban areas. This focus on a sustainable urban development has been also reiterated in this current programming period. And the different type of, let's say, policy instruments can be used in order to produce these, to develop these integrated strategies. I don't want to go into the details of this policy instrument, but just for you to know, because probably you will listen to this name also later on, the integrated territorial investment that can be used to implement urban and territorial strategies that rely on investment from different funds, and the community-led local development that can be used in particular to involve local stakeholders and civil society. So what is the main, let's say, principle, the main approach at the base of these urban and territorial strategies promoted by the European Union? It's the so-called integrated place-based approach. And these that are listed here in this graph are some of the key principles of this approach. It should be cross-sectoral in the sense that these strategies integrate different policy areas. It should involve a multi-level and multi-stakeholder governance system with the involvement of actors from public administration at different levels, but also various stakeholders at the local level and even more importantly, the involvement of citizens, the direct engagement of citizens. And finally, here in the green symbol of this graph, another key principle is the fact that these strategies should have a clear territorial focus and they should promote the integration across territorial scales. These are very different type of strategies. The territorial focus can be a neighborhood, can be a city, can be a functional urban area. But anyway, the importance is that it's clearly defined, is respond to the local needs and opportunity. And also what is, let's say, part of this type of approach is that the integration among scales is encouraged. So, having said that, what are the research questions that we try to answer with our research project? Thinking that place has a role to play in the multidimensional process of exclusion and inclusion of migrants, we try to see if EU place-based policy can foster migrant integration. And in particular, we looked at urban and territorial strategy that were used during the 2014 and 2020 programming period to see if they contributed to migrant integration and how. We focus on a specific territorial scale that are functional urban areas. So we asked if functional urban areas as strategic planning places are suitable for developing place-based solution to the challenge of migrants inclusion. Sorry, I have some problem with with my slides. So why functional urban area? What are functional urban areas? Functional urban areas are spatial configurations that are not characterized by administrative boundaries, not necessarily, let's say, by bifunctional relations. And in particular, the European Commission, together with the OECD, comes with a common definition of FUA to be used mainly for statistical purpose in a homogeneous way across the EU. And they defined functional urban areas as densely populated urban areas and the adjacent municipalities with a high level of commuting towards the core. So basically cities and commuting zones. For us, we thought that using this spatial scale was particularly interesting in order to deal with the challenge of migrants inclusion. Why? Because this is a special scale that allows to size those aspects of migrants' daily life that transcend the neighborhood or municipality boundaries, especially in considering that migrants today doesn't live exclusively in central areas, in core main cities, but let's say centrifugal forces push them to live also in peripheral areas and towns outside urban cores. And we decided to focus on functional urban areas also because EU urban strategies are encouraged to target functional urban area as strategic planning spaces. So let's see what type of analysis we did in our research. Two main, let's say, type of analysis. The first was an analysis of urban and territorial strategies implementing during 2014-2020 and the migrants in functional urban areas at EU level. So this analysis at EU 27 coverage, it was run at the level of FUAs, and we used two types of data: Eurostat data for what concerned the socio-economic and demographic data, and the Stratboard for what concerned data on EU urban and territorial strategies. Stratboard is a database that was made by the JRC that collects information on all EU supported strategies for urban and territorial development. So for our analysis, as I said, was focused on functional urban areas, and in particular, we found 988 urban and territorial strategies that target areas contained in FUAs. These type of areas can be different, not necessarily overlap totally with the FUA. In fact, the 30% of those strategies target cities within FUA, the 18% neighborhoods within the cities, and the 16% FUAs intend this as aggregation of municipalities. But again, the interpretation of what is a functional urban area in the different contexts can vary a lot. And then there is also 25% that target other type of functional territories within functional urban areas. In our analysis, we try to analyze the characteristics that are potentially associated with the objective of migrant integration. Those strategies were not conceived with the explicit objective of integrated migrant, but in fact, the main objective are lowering carbon emission, for example, or responding to climate change challenges. But what we found is that, and it's particularly interesting, is that the second most recurrent investment priority used by those strategies is providing the regeneration of deprived communities, deprived neighborhood. The 33% of strategies had this investment priority. And this suggests a possible place-based approach to migrants inclusion when migrants, in fact, lived within this deprived neighborhood. Moreover, what we found is that 39% of the strategies mobilized beside the European Regional Development Fund, which is the main fund used, also the European Social Fund. And this is also interesting because when they used both funds, they were able to integrate more infrastructural measures together with more social measures in employment, training, education, for example, that resonates well with the needs of migrants in the local contexts. Finally, we analyzed also keywords that can give an idea of the type of project that are implemented through these strategies. And we found, in fact, that many strategies as keyword social inclusion, many of them disadvantaged neighborhood, and only a few of them integration of migrants and refugees. And what is interesting about the keyword disadvantaged neighborhood is that not only those strategies that focus explicitly on neighborhood as had these keywords, but also the one that had wider scales, focusing, for example, on functional urban areas, used the keyword disadvantaged neighborhood. The second part of the research was to develop some in-depth case studies. In fact, there were some limitations with the EU level overview because we couldn't go into a very granular level in order to analyze what was happening within the functional urban areas. So we select 5 case studies, Athens, Liège, Malmo, and Paris and Venice, that were analyzed by different experts. And these case studies are very different one from the other because they are different local contexts. We go from the very wide functional urban area of Paris with 12 million inhabitants to the small FUA of Venice with 560,000 inhabitants. Also, the number of strategy is very different, and the typology of strategies within this FUA is very different one from the other. And also for what concerned the waves and composition of migrants there. So we have a variety of cases. The type of analysis that we did matched a territorial analysis with a policy analysis. And these are the type of questions that were asked within the single cases. What is the relationship between the areas targeted by the strategy and the areas with a higher presence of migrants? Do the strategy and its project explicitly or implicitly address migrant integration? And do they address relevant issues in respect to migrant integration? This was also to try to understand the possible indirect linkages. And finally, are there migrant-related actors among the stakeholders involved in the policy process? So these were the main questions that were asked. And just to be very brief, what are the main findings from the case studies? For what concerns, let's say, the spatial targets, what we discover is that, in fact, in the majority of cases, strategies and projects target areas associated with indicator of socioeconomic and spatial disadvantage and where high percentage of migrant lives. And this happened also when the strategy has a functional urban area scope. This means that precisely one of the principles of the integrated place-based approach was respected, the integration among different territorial scales from the neighborhood to the functional urban area level. The second finding for what concerns thematic focus is that several cases revealed a potential indirect benefit for migrants. So, in fact, the type of improvement that were promoted by these strategies matched with the migrants' need at the FUA level. We are talking about different type of projects that go from transport improvement to social housing to projects in terms of employment, for example. And then there were a few strategies that did have an explicit focus on migrant integration. This was declared or at the strategy level, and I would say only in one case, the case of Malmo, or more often at project level, where some project had as explicit beneficiary migrants. And finally, what we discovered is that migrants themselves and migrant-based associations were rarely explicitly involved in the design, implementation, and monitoring of the strategies and of their project. In fact, still there were several barriers for their full involvement, first and foremost, but not only language barriers. So what are the main conclusion and recommendation of our research? The first conclusion is that working at the scale of the functional urban area has an added value. What the study revealed is that these type of strategies that work at the FUA level can better analyze pattern of socio-spatial disadvantage. And for example, they can detect also micro pockets of disadvantage within wealthy areas. Secondly, working at the scale of functional urban areas allow to work on topics that transcend administrative boundaries and that are important for migrants' inclusion, for example, transport. And finally, they allow to adopt an outward-looking approach to neighborhood regeneration, reconnecting the private neighborhood into, let's say, more functioning wider areas, and breaking the isolation that sometimes the type of neighbors suffer from. The second conclusion is that cross-sectoral integration is the key. Strategies and projects are more effective when they are able to integrate different policy action and funding stream, for example, the ERDF and the ESF. This type of integrated project better respond to the needs of migrants. Then we also found that there are still barriers, as I said, to the inclusion of migrants in the governance system of strategies. So our recommendation is that to the scope, methodological support and capacity building measure for managing a local authority should be provided, especially in the future. And finally, our final recommendation is that a combination of the place-based approach with a people-based approach should be recommended. Why? Because if a place-based approach is, let's say, more apt in the long run to is more effective, especially for those migrants that are permanently residing in some areas, it is less effective for intercepting the most vulnerable categories, for example, transit migrants or homeless. So a combination of approaches has to be considered to the direction of leaving no place and no one behind. And this is so the report will be online today. You will find it at this link that you can see here. I will put it later on also in the chat. And very thank you for listening to me. If you have any kind of question, I'm happy to answer. And you can also contact me at my email address. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Carlotta, for your presentation. I would like now to give the floor to Ms. Otilia Otilia Ciobanu. As mentioned before, she is policy officer in the European Commission Department for Regional and Urban Planning. She works in the unit on inclusive growth, urban and territorial development, and she provides horizontal guidance on the ERDF, support for social inclusion of groups in vulnerable conditions, such as Roma, people with a migrant background, and people with disability. Please, Otilia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I would just like to confirm, wait, I'm moving all the little boxes so you see as well as possible. And if you can confirm, you can see me, hear me, and see my presentation. The full slide mode should be on right now.
Everything is set. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks to you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation today. We're very honored to be today in the panel. Thank you for conducting this study and for presenting the outcomes of this study, which are very relevant also for our work in DG Regio. I just like to mention from the beginning that I'm happy to provide the perspective of the EU funds, in particular the ERDF, European Regional Development Fund, angle to the support for integration of people with a migrant background. So I'll be complementing the first presentation that you have just seen. I'll try not to repeat many of the same elements so that we can all provide a comprehensive view and different angles. Going directly to the topic, you will see here some articles, doesn't matter the number. I just want to mention some principles that we have in the legislative regulation. So here I refer to the Common Provision Regulation and the ERDF, European Regional Development Fund Regulation. These principles refer to the partnership. So involvement of the relevant bodies, and this can include fundamental rights bodies, bodies representing the interests of people with a migrant background. They should be part of the consultations of all the programs, of the strategies that we are discussing here today, and also be part of the monitoring committees. It's important to mention also that the regulation contains provision on the fact that administrative capacity building can be supported by the funds for social partners and for civil society organizations, and that as horizontal principles, fundamental rights, respect for the charter, and appropriate steps to prevent any discrimination should be seen in all the measures that are supported by our funds. You'll see later on how I materialize all of these horizontal considerations. I'm sorry here if you don't see well, okay, I cannot do anything about the top of my screen. Last but not least, I want to emphasize that under any specific objective of the programs under cohesion policy, there should be actions that safeguard equality, inclusion, and non-discrimination. This should be mentioned. This is all the technical parts that I'm doing. And now moving on more particularly to what do we support when it comes to integration of people with a migrant background. It's important, and I think many of the messages that were just presented by Carlota are mirrored in my presentation. So it's great that we have this reinforcement of messages. So we are expecting that when addressing the needs and challenges that people with a migrant background face, that there are measures in all social inclusion thematic areas. So education, employment, social housing, health and social care, accompanied by anti-discrimination measures, etc. As you know, the ERDF support mainly consists in infrastructure development, equipment, and access to mainstream high quality services. And taking into account the specificity of the scope of support, we have to ensure that measures do not lead to further segregation or isolation of marginalized communities, including people with a migrant background. You already see in the corner the territorial instruments already presented by Carlota. These can be used for addressing the needs of people with a migrant background, for example, in the scope of regeneration of deprived urban and rural areas, but also for addressing education and spatial segregation. Moving on even in more depth about the measures, and to also try to have the focus of the meeting today on the spatial dimension, we can emphasize that the support provided by ERDF is for social housing, So it can be in terms of building, refurbishing, renting, but in mainstream community. So in non-segregated areas. And as mentioned in the previous presentation, it should be accompanied by complementary measures in education, employment, health, and social care. And we have to take into account that our main purpose is desegregation, so relocating people who live in segregated areas to mainstream areas, to the mainstream community. For this purpose, also in terms of facilitating access to mainstream education and preventing education segregation, the capacity of mainstream schools and at all levels of education can be extended with the IDF support, and measures such as busing to bring the children from marginalized areas to the mainstream schools can also be supported. Other than that, IT equipment, which was very clear also during the COVID pandemics, the big discrepancy that children faced in being able to follow education, online education. And we should not forget the angle of building family and community-based care services. And this also addresses the needs of people with a migrant background. Moving to the integrated territorial development focus and policy objective 5, many of the elements were already presented by Carlota, so I will not go in too much detail. It is important to mention that strategies should include the social dimension of integration in their sustainable urban development strategies. And the new Leipzig Charter also calls for cities to provide opportunities for everyone to integrate in the society. The fact that there's a focus on functional urban area can be encouraged because of the limitations that can be mitigated through this approach that targeted neighborhood regeneration initiatives can cause. And in this way, we are ensuring that people are not being pushed away and that their access to mainstream services would be even more limited. Very important to mention again is this partnership. I noticed it also emphasized in the previous presentation that local authorities, regional authorities, and local communities, members of the communities should be part of the development of the territorial strategies so that the strategies reflect their needs. And the sustainable urban development strategies can also draw inspiration from urban innovative actions, OIA, and from URBAC projects. I'll come back to this later with more details also on the European Urban Initiative. And the 21-27 framework provides the opportunities for trying this innovative approaches. This I'll completely skip, but I have to include it in my presentation, the overview of territorial tools. And then to give you more insight also into some other initiatives that we have developed. I briefly mentioned them just now, maybe the study on territorial impact of migration I have not mentioned yet. Please feel free to access it. It gives statistical analysis on local data on integration of people with a migrant background. The case studies and the recommendations can also be very useful for you. I'd like to dive just for a second into the toolkit that we have prepared and updated. The first edition was prepared in 2018. Now we have updated it to reflect the 21-27 legislative framework, and we have also added some new chapters. This is the overview of the structure of the toolkit. Why this is relevant for you? Because in the toolkit, we have chosen relevant areas in which people with a migrant background are facing challenges. So education, housing, employment, social care and healthcare, reception, basic mainstream services, and the discrimination and misrepresentation they are facing. What did we do under these chapters? We first described the challenges, and then we proposed measures that can be supported by the three main funds for integration. So European Regional Development Fund, ERDF, European Social Fund Plus, ESF Plus, and AMIF, Asylum Migration Integration Fund. It was mentioned by Carlota already, the importance of synergies between the funds. So we hope that with this toolkit, which is going to be published in the next days, you will get both thematic support, but also support on how these funds can be programmed together, and how measures can be complementary to ensure an effective integration of people with a migrant background, and to give course to implement local integration strategies, regional strategies, and national strategies. Again, to have the focus on the housing and on the spatial dimension, which the event is focusing on. I presented just a snapshot of some of the chapters. This one is on housing. You see the challenges, the spatial segregation, the overcrowdedness, the discrimination. And just to mention that in this case, ERDF can support social housing in the mainstream community. ESF Plus can contribute with complementary measures in access to employment, social care, health, education, following, for example, the Housing First model. And AMIF can support with addressing housing discrimination. So training stakeholders in anti-discrimination, legal environments, and training experts. The next chapter is on reception. Similar measures can be supported by each of the funds, and I invite you to have a look at the toolkit, as well as this added chapter on the role of local authorities, which reflects on the challenges that local authorities are facing, how to combine and integrate in the urban development strategies measures for integration. And you'll see there that all of our funds support capacity building for local authorities. So also following up to the previous presentation. And now my last slide refers to the novel instrument that we have set up, the European Urban Initiative. And the whole purpose is to provide a comprehensive support to cities. And it brings together different initiatives under the same umbrella, so to make our support as efficient as possible. So on the one hand, we are going to support innovative actions that are going to provide the context to develop and transfer scalable solutions to urban challenges. Another strand is improving capacities of cities, and this would help them to design and implement the sustainable urban development strategies and policies. We are promoting knowledge sharing and capitalization on the benefits of urban policy development, and we are going to support the urban agenda also under this initiative. And cities of all sizes can benefit from this initiative. We have a close connection with GRC, and we're very thankful for that in the area of knowledge building and sharing. And we are estimating that we are launching the activities under the European Urban Initiative in mid-2022 with the first EUI innovative action call for the topic of New European Bauhaus. Thank you so much for your attention. This is also a slide that will be shared with you in case in the audience there are people interested on how to access EU funds. And I await any of your questions. Thank you so much. I hope I was within the time.
Thank you so much, Otilia. I will now leave the floor to Mr. Grzegorz Gajewski, Program Manager in DG Migration and Home Affairs. For the last 10 years, he has been working on issues related with the use of funds to address challenges concerning migration and security. His areas of expertise include the development of synergies between policy priorities, operational initiatives, and funding, especially for what concerns migrants integration. I'm sure that after the presentation of Otilia, that set the basis for some knowledge already on funding. The presentation of Grzegorz will explain us even more how to efficiently integrate these different lines of fundings to promote the integration of migrants. So please.
And I would like, first of all, to thank you for the invitation, and I would like to congratulate all the team who did the research, which is very, very interesting, which reflects the policy approach that we have. I come from the DG, which is leading on the policy on integration of migrants. So I am very happy to see this research and to see the findings which were elaborated as outcomes of this research. And I'm very happy to see so many colleagues around the EU, even outside the EU, present here. So it's very good. I'm not sure that I will present you new ideas, perhaps with a different approach, because many things were already presented by Carlotta and Ottilia, but I would like to highlight some important concepts which are in the core of integration policy. So I would like to indicate you the big dynamics that the Commission has developed in this regard over 20 years, because a real policy on integration of migrants were set up with the establishing of a fund in 2007. This fund, European Integration Fund, was allocated a small envelope with 800 million euros. Now the funding, the specific funding, EU funding available to address integration issues were was substantially increased. Now we have the fund, Asylum Migration Integration Fund, which envelope amounts to nearly 10 billion euros. Of course, this 10 billion euros does not mean that all the money will go to integration, because we have three major policy funding priorities. A part of this envelope will go to integration, and other envelopes, other resources will go to management of asylum system, asylum reception system, asylum applications process, and return operations. So what is important now in this stage of the evolution of the policy on integration of migrants is to see this increase of resources, of dedicated resources, but the new reinforced approach on pooling of resources, on synergies of mainstreaming integration of migrants among all the possible EU funds. I will come back to this issue with a specific slide. You will see which kind of funds could be used for the purposes of integration of migrants. The Commission has set up policy orientations with a view in the context of support, of guiding, because the primary responsibilities for integration of migrants lies with the local, regional, national authorities. So the Commission adopted nearly 1 year ago, on 24 November 2020, an action plan on integration of inclusion of migrants, of third country nationals, and migrants, of EU citizens with migrant background. So it is a wide scope of target groups in this regard. And among the different categories of support that the Commission, the EU, could bring to local, regional, and national authorities are support and coordination tools and structures, a specific network which was created a few years ago, which provides a platform for discussions, for exchange of best practices, for improving the integration efforts done at the local, regional, and national level. And of course, what Ottilia mentioned, we have since 2 years, I think, I was involved in the preparation of a toolkit on the integration, on the use of EU funds for the integration of migrants. We have a very good toolkit which was expanded, which was updated now with concrete examples and with considerations to the new legal framework. So all these initiatives, policy, funding, operational, aims at complement and leverage local, regional, national efforts and resources. It's very important to understand this because, as I mentioned, the primary responsibilities lies with local, regional, and national authorities, depending on the structure of the organization of the states. What is important is to empower migrants, of course. It's to empower organization, authorities, and local communities through this, policy orientations, funding, and operational initiatives. So very quickly, some of the main principles of the action plan adopted last year is inclusion for all, targeted support where needed. So we have this complementary approach. targeted measures and mainstreaming migrants among other vulnerable groups, disadvantaged groups, or other policy perspective like urban policies or educational policy or anything else. So in this action plan, there are four major policy fields: education and training, employment and skills, health, housing. It is question to allowing facilitated access to education, employment, health services, housing. It's question to create a favorable environment for migrants or for organizations to help them being integrated. So what was already said, and I repeat this is very important. I think it's a core of the approach on integration of migrants. It's question of a multi-sectoral, multi-stakeholder partnership, very important in the current stage of a programming process. We are in the process of discussing with member states the founding process. So as mentioned, we expect a very robust partnership approach adopted by the authorities to consider the founding process in the MFF 21-27. And one word on the importance to initiate integration of migrants very early, as soon as they have the legal status in the country. So sometimes it's the status is given to asylum seekers very early. Sometimes it's longer in their asylum process application examination. So I would like to highlight what is important, what is stressed in the action plan. So it's a question of combination of place approach and people approach. The action plan emphasizes very much the importance of this interactions between local communities and migrants. And action plan highlights the importance of involving migrants in the decision making, in the process of elaborating strategies or of implementing the strategy at the local level, national level. And we, with different guidance, different initiatives, we try to promote this inclusion of migrants in the decision-making process. So these interactions could be done from different initiatives, cultural, sport, and media initiatives. It's very important to develop this process. So very briefly on this dedicated fund, Asylum Migration Integration Fund. In the previous MFF, the global envelope, including asylum integration and return operations priorities, amounted to 7.5 billion. Now this envelope has been slightly increased by 1/3 nearly. So there are more resources and more dedicated arrangements for local authorities to develop, to launch integration initiatives. They are among the major priorities on integration. They are setting up and developing integration strategies. Very important, because we notice that in many contexts, in many places, in many cities, member states, these integration strategies are missing. So we encourage with the funding to develop them and to implement. The fund aims at as well to provide advice and assistance to migrants, to target groups, and as I mentioned, to develop these interactions with local communities and to contribute to self-empowerment of migrants, to create opportunities that they become self-empowered. So as a result of actions with the support of this fund, 7 million migrants were assisted, and more than 10,000 cooperation and tools development projects were undertaken to ensure to develop capacities of different authorities. Now, a very interesting slide, because you can see on it different funding sources that may be used to support integration efforts. So, as mentioned, of course, ERDF and Cohesion Fund, ESF Plus, Horizon Europe can be used as well. Dedicated fund, AMIF, as I mentioned, at ERDF for rural areas, Erasmus Plus for education, for capacity building actions, and for individual support for migrants. And we have now, I would like to say one word on this framework, financial framework, which is called InvestEU. We have a specific window to implement financial instruments. So social investment and skills window will allow to develop partnerships, pooling of resources with financial institutions. And we pay very much attention to the potential of the social investment and skills window to further provide increased leverage resources for integration of migrants. So what was mentioned, and I would like to repeat because this is very important in the framework of the topic that we are discussing, so the need for synergies. I provide you with some examples of synergies between funds, between actions to be done that may be done with the support of AMIF, ERDF, ESF. It could be a sequential approach. There are different sequences in the integration process. So, for instance, AMIF could provide resources for information, awareness raising, and cultural actions towards local communities before open arrival, and after ERDF can take over to help in providing social housing, and ESF could help in providing well-being social assistance services, which could target exclusively migrants, but could mainstream migrants among other groups, vulnerable groups, disadvantaged groups, which needs attention in respect to social inclusion. Another examples lies with employment, very important topic in the framework of economic inclusion, integration of migrants. So AMIF could provide rather limited resources to map potential of migrants, to provide them with language courses, and to provide information sessions on the market requirements or on the legal requirements to access legal market, while ESF with bigger resources could provide more substantive, more larger schemes of intervention with vocational trainings, globally speaking, or in specific areas. So I am coming to the end of my presentation, and I would like to to see the issues from a specific from another perspective, and I like this interrelations between 4Ps. And indeed, 4Ps approach should be implemented to comprehensively address integration issues. So we need policies to frame actions, policies. So it means strategies, different strategies, local strategies, strategies on integration of migrants, strategies on social inclusion, strategies perhaps on employment opportunities, on job creation. We need to use the potential offered by the migrants. It's very important to see the potential. So different actions can be foreseen to use this potential in a coordinated way. So as I mentioned, I repeat again, partnership between relevant actors, and of course we need to see the performance of the funding. It means, social impact measurement, social impact approach to see what are the real results, what are the consequences of the funding on the ground, and for this we need to use milestones, indicators, and data to see to which extent the funding contributed to real changes on the ground. So we have this 4Ps: policies, potential, partnership, performance, and to be implemented in this, a global approach of coordination of structures, different structures, organizations, to build coherence of interventions ensured by complementarities of funding. So we have 3 C's, 3 C's approach to streamline the integration policies. So the objective of this effort, of this strategic framework, of this operational framework, should lead to impact on empowerment of administrations and empowerment of migrants and inclusive communities. So I will stop here and yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity provided to me to talk about this issue with a certain perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grzegorz. And I'm really sorry that we have not so much time to reply to question live, but my colleague Carlotta already replied to some of the question on the chat. So please, if you have other questions, continue to type them in the chat, because we will try to answer either in a way or another. So I think it's now time to conclude this first session of the conference. There was a lot of food for thought and probably also a lot of food for discussion for the next the next part of the conference. Therefore, I will now leave the floor to another moderator, which is Miss Laura Collini. She has a PhD in urban, regional and environmental design. Her intellectual work and activism cover socio-spatial inequalities with a focus in recent years on public policies addressing migrants, refugees and housing. In the past, she worked in academic research in Italy, Germany, France and the US. And she also works with NGOs and international organizations and independent civic initiatives concerning not only migration, but also housing and homelessness. So I think she will also provide us very insightful comments and suggestions, and also insightful questions for our experts that we involved in the elaboration of this report. So please, Laura, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Paula, for introducing me. I just want to thank you, everyone, and the organizer for this very interesting seminar, for having me. I'm here as an independent researcher, as Paula just said, but I also work for URBACT and represent URBACT in the EU Urban Agenda of Inclusions of Migrants and Refugees, and also work for the UIA. And thank you also for Ottilia Ciobanu before for supporting the use of ERDF on housing first, and also the work of UIA and URBACT. So I'm delighted to have read the 140 pages excellent report that the JRC produced in this topic of discussion today, and to have the distinguished researcher with us that we're going to present the case studies they wrote about. So the report that has been already presented in the session before had some highlight, in my point of view, that can be very interesting for cities and public administrations in general. So we have a range of 5 cities, which are not representative at all of the situation in Europe completely, but they offer a very interesting insight because they are very different. You have, in terms of demography, you have cities for 700,000 inhabitants to 12,000 million. And then you have different types of focus in terms of policies, in terms of reception, integration and inclusion. In certain cases, some respondents said in the interviews of the case studies that it is hard to understand whether the strategic guidelines of plans and strategies adopted are really benefiting migrants and refugees. There are challenges in terms of bureaucratic problems in also matching ERDF and ESF, and also the instruments adopted, like the integrated territorial investment, has allowed each territory to choose the focus on migration in different ways. And so, and also we have challenges in terms of political representation. So this research, this study offers really a very, very interesting and powerful insight of all these challenges and how they have been dealt locally. And it also groups these challenges and their responses in 3 thematic foci. The first one would be on specifically on the type of strategies, the second one on the spatial dimension, and the third one on the governance, intending governance specifically more on participation, involvement, and consultation of migrants. And I would like to give the floor with 3 questions addressing these 3 different foci or focuses, the way you were saying in English, to Paola Briata, who's Associate Professor in Planning and Urban Policy at the Politecnico di Milano, where she teaches urban planning and urban ethnography, to Professor Marco Cremaschi, internationally renowned expert in urban policies and Professor of Planning of the, at the Master in Urban Planning and Design at the Urban School of Sciences Po in Paris. Jérémy Mandin is a PhD in anthropology and in social sciences, affiliated to CEDEM, and is a researcher that collaborated in different projects dealing with urban dynamics, integration, and social cohesion, who covered the case of Liège. Nikos Karadimitriou, University College of London, is a spatial planner with experience in different projects working with the EU, DG Regio and UN Habitat, but also being a researcher and academic. And last but not least, Erika Rigard, a PhD and Associate Professor at the Department of Social Work in Malmö, who's not with us today, unfortunately, because she could not join us for case of personal reasons, and but we will cover a little bit the case of Malmö in our discussion. So without no further ado, I would like to delve into the case studies and the questions that I have prepared with the help of Carlotta for our speakers. So first one, we start with the thematic focus. We would like to have a discussion on how migrant integration is addressed both directly and indirectly in the functional urban areas, and also looking at the limits and advantages of sustainable urban development strategies in tackling some of the challenges that I briefly mentioned on the ground. And maybe we can open up the conversation with Professor Marco Cremaschi, who covered the case of Paris. It's extremely interesting and complex cases that can give some insights to this question. The floor is yours, Marco, please.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you to the organizers. This has been an extraordinary experience, a research experience, which has been well coordinated and extremely well brought to this end by the GRC team, and I'd like to thank them for the opportunity they gave us in working on this topic. Talking about Paris, let's first make a strong statement. Paris was a very difficult case for the simple reason that the urban agglomeration, the functional urban area, is extremely large, even larger than the metropolitan area itself. So almost the size of the region. So we are talking about one of the economic cores of Europe, one of the most vibrant and dynamic part of the continent. That said, we have been trying to work alongside the directives of this research, looking in areas, intermediate areas, where the programs for the integration of migrants have occurred. And what's extremely interesting is that first, the city of Paris, the metropolitan area of Paris, the functional area of Paris, has a very strong geographical structure in terms of social geography. So, there are areas where migrants concentrate. The average of the city is 10% of foreign born, 20% of foreign born. In some part of the metropolitan areas is twice as much, but in some cities, small cities, but cities of 100,000 inhabitants, however, is 50%. So you understand that this is a strong concentration. And what occurred in the functional area is that even if the integration policies is a competence in France of the national state, intermediate bodies between the metropolitan government and municipalities have been involved in the integration of migrants, following the pattern of this geographical structure. So yes, indeed, north and eastern part of the metropolitan areas were involved, and were involved in a direct way, if not in explicit way, however, strongly focusing upon the inclusion of the weakest part of the population, of which migrants and refugees are included. And I think that's the second point. This is part of the political cleverness of the policymakers there, that they, one of the characteristics of the metropolitan area of Paris, of the implementation of the integration policies, they occurred inside the framework of local development policies. They were extremely coordinated with the local strategies for a sustainable urban development. So even if the migrant issues was not directly emphasized as such, you understand that in an area where half of the inhabitants are, almost half of the inhabitants are of immigrant origins, whatever you do in terms of social cohesion is actually directed at least half or 50% to this population. So you understand there is a strong structural geography on the backside. There is a political commitment on the foreground. The two of them combine for making some of these strategies extremely clear and extremely performant.
Thank you very much. Maybe we can ask Nikos, because the case of Paris, also because of its size and what just Marcus said, the geographic dimension, we don't have a very comparable case. Also, the case of Paris, if I'm not mistaken from the report, it had 15 ITI, and you analyzed 8 of them. So we don't have anything comparable in the report, but maybe the case of Athens can add some information. They had ITI, but also they use they benefited from the UIA project Curing the Limbo in the city of Athens. Maybe Nikos, the floor is yours if you can give some insights to us for that case. Thanks. We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Perfectly, thanks.
Good. Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And indeed, there are similarities, but also differences between Athens and Paris. In Athens as well, there is a very strong concentration of people born outside Greece and migrated in the country since the end of the 90s, in areas of the city center, but also in parts of the periphery of the functional urban area. The functional urban area as such, of course, is bigger than the actual metropolitan area. It covers most of the region, but it's not an administrative unit, and it's more of an analytical unit in our case. Administratively, the city is split into municipalities, and there is the regional government as well, but not along the lines of the functional area. The concentration of immigrants in the city center and in parts of the metropolitan area as well, is combined with areas of deprivation. So in many cases, the two coincide. There are areas of deprivation, and these areas also have a strong presence of migrants. This is not necessarily the case for every migrant group. There is a clear distinction between migrants who arrived from Eastern Europe and the Balkans in the early 90s, and migrants who arrived recently after 2010, so just after the economic crisis happened in Greece. The strategies as such now, just to move to the topic of the strategies, the strategies themselves are began to get sort of mainstreamed in the Greek system, the Greek planning and sort of social policy system sometime in the middle of 2010s, so 2015, 2016. This was more or less the time when the big refugee waves, we all, I guess, know what happened back then, yeah, from Syria and so on. So it's not surprising that in some cases they don't necessarily recognize this, because it was all happening almost in parallel, and actually many of them had been drafted by the time all this happened, yeah. It's also important to understand that in the Greek case, the logic of drafting those strategies as part of the so the managing authority effectively used the regional operational program and the pillars of the regional operational program that are relevant to this are two strategies: the research and innovation strategy and the strategy to tackle social exclusion and poverty. So these are not migrant specific, and that's the important thing to remember. So any policy that existed beforehand, or any instrument that exists beforehand, like the Athens Master Plan, many local plans for urban regeneration and so on, because they don't necessarily target migration, but they target topics like social exclusion, poverty, and so on, they led the strategies also to not necessarily tackle migrants, yeah, as such. So the focus was on thematic and not necessarily migrant focused. But of course, because of the specialization, because of the strong area-based element, and the combination of concentration of migrants and deprivation, the beneficiaries in many cases would be migrants in this case. There is a footnote, however, that in order to participate in the drafting of the strategies, and in many cases in order to benefit directly as an applicant and direct beneficiary, of course you need to speak the language. And this isn't the case with older migrants who have already in many cases integrated in the housing market, in the labor market, and so on. Some of them gained citizenship. And the newer migrants who actually see Greece as a transition space and have issues of even understanding, you know, where to apply for a specific document or how to really find their feet in the country. Having said that, and I will finish with this, the UIA, the Urban Innovative Action, was actually, in my view, also a very good example of, let's say, an experimental platform where several solutions were tried and tested. And indeed, there were very good results, very good lessons learned. For example, for the housing element, in the context of Athens, in the context of Greece, indeed, it was possible to find ways to house people, to integrate people in the housing market, effectively to create trust between private landlords and refugees, recognized asylum seekers. The action just finished, and it remains to be seen how much of that will become now, how many of those lessons will become mainstream and adopted at local level, meaning the Greek policy, but also EU policy as such. Yeah, nothing, I mean, that's it from me, nothing more to add. Overall, I think it was a positive example, a positive experience, and many lessons learned, which hopefully will be adopted.
Thank you very much, Nikos. Just lost the last word, but I think that the message, your message got through. Thank you very much. I would like to address one of the questions from the audience, saying that in the studies, especially possibly for this area of multi-level governance, have you studied and looked at tensions between different approaches at different administrative scales? And I think that this is a very important question, especially if we talk about the specific investments, like you would say, in housing, who has the competencies and how they're managed. I think it's a very complex also question to answer in the frame of this seminar, of the panel. Maybe some answer can be responded in written forms in the chat. I would like to go to the next step of the spatial focus, next focus of the report, because most of the case studies that we have been reading about in your report have a broad spatial focus, obviously because of the functional urban areas, but when we see an implementation of SUD, they cover specific urban areas, especially sometimes even at the level of neighborhood, which remind us of past projects and policies like the pilot project in Urban 1 and Urban 2. And so it's, from your point of view, your research, what would be the innovative aspect in place-based approach? The case of Venice, I think, can provide us some information about that, some reflection on this, also because it has a long history on investment on inclusion of migrants and refugees, but also it looks at investment infrastructure for social inclusion in terms of housing and transportation. And I give the floor to Professor Paola Briata for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Laura, for the introduction, and also to the JRC team for this experience. That was really great, as Mark also said. And yes, we all know that Venice is a port between the East and the West, and it started to be an arrival city for more recent migration since the 90s, with people arriving from the Balkans. And so since then, Venice has developed a quite welcoming policy style, and this background seems to resist despite recent changes in the political orientation of the local government. A core point in the most recent policy narrative that we found also in the actions that we studied is helping people in need, including immigrants, but not because they are immigrants, I would say. And two, sustainable urban development strategies were implemented in Venice during this programming period. The strategy for the urban area of Venice, funded through ERDF, and the strategy for the metropolitan area of Venice, funded by the national operational program called PON Metro for the metropolitan areas. And all the actors that I could reach agreed that the PON Metro led to more innovation, because a mix of ARDF and ESF funds could be mobilized. So they are all very happy that with the new programming cycle, this strategy has been confirmed and I would say reinforced. And I make an example in this sense. At the micro level, the targets of many actions were housing and public spaces in Mestre and Marghera, the two main settlements of Venice in the mainland. And immigrants were not a specific target, but areas where many immigrants live actually were target. And action of housing in terms of renewal or conversion, for example, in co-housing solutions for people in need, were coupled with actions such as the creation of an help desk to support people in finding housing solution in the public or private market, matching demand and offer, or an empowerment objective such as asking cooperatives to manage temporary housing and to transfer residents the skills to find a place to stay on their own. And many public spaces, especially parks, were also improved, and in this case physical renewal was coupled with actions aimed at filling in those spaces, those places with people and activities. So services, association included for immigrants and some of their specific needs. And the target were areas where people, old people, young people, immigrants, natives, and so on, shared their lives, some problems and some opportunities. Carlotta at the beginning was talking about people and places. And here I think we found again this old debate on people and places in regeneration policies. Different measures and policies converged on the same area, mainly at the neighborhood level, But it's interesting that even at a more micro scale, because we were thinking that in contemporary cities, poverty and disadvantage is more and more concentrated in a single street sometime, or even in a single building. So this is a core point, not to leave behind, as we are saying, pockets of disadvantage. At a more macro scale, improvement, for example, on sustainable mobility had an impact also on the immigrants' lives, because they provided a better connection between the first belt of municipalities where many immigrants live and central Venice, where they work mainly in the hospitality sector. And the functional urban area, that is the core point in this research also, as defined by Eurostat, was not a point of reference in local policy making. But this area, and broadly speaking also Italy, seems still characterized by a large number of small municipalities where cooperation on a common strategic project remains very, very difficult. So this is still a central point to conceiving the recently also established in Italy metropolitan cities, not only as a new but not useful administrative boundary on a map. And this is what I wanted to say, the main points that I found in the case of Venice.
Thank you very much, Paola. I take from your presentation 2 points that maybe are helpful also for the next question. You're saying that the functional urban areas as geographic entity is not very much taken into account when we speak of local policies, which is a very important point, I would say. But also you're trying to say that there is a challenge on linking the very micro level, like how to make sure that no one left behind concept really bridges the policies at the very large scale to the level of the building, to make sure that the end beneficiaries really benefit from the policy that are designed in Brussels. And so then the next question is like, well, how do you make sure that the migrant-led association and groups are represented in the decision-making process? So one of the important question is that how SUD strategies and other instruments that develop, especially the CLLD, the community-led local development, and ITI, do address the participation and the governance of migrant-led association and groups. And I would like to give the floor to Jérémy Mandin, who covered the case of Liège. Liège is a very interesting case, a small city, but very active also in the Welcoming Cities network since 2017, Ville Hospitalière, and also active in other networks internationally, like Urbach, the Roof Network, working on housing first and eradicating zero homelessness. And the floor is yours, Jérémy, for the case of Liège.
Thank you very much. So thank you again to the GRC team for all the organization and for giving me the opportunity to present the result of this small research. So yeah, the case of Liège may be a word of context. So we are talking about 751,000 inhabitants in the functional urban area of Liège. And so it is, so the urban region of Liège is characterized by a lot of characteristics, but among them, the fact that in terms of migration, it's a city and it's a functional urban area which is characterized by both dynamic of migration, but also situation of, let's say, post-migration, in the sense that it's a place that is characterized both by historical arrival of migrants, so migrant workforce, for example, after the Second World War, and then in the 70s onward, kind of shift in the type of migration which arrived in the city, and also a diversification of the profile of the migrants who arrive in this urban region. So it means that when we talk about migrants, of course, we are talking about a lot of different situations potentially. We talk about people who are now aging, who are who arrived in the 60s, 70s. We are also talking about potentially, if we talk about second generation, for example, we're talking about the children, the grandchildren, and we are also talking of new migrants who continue to arrive in the city. We are also talking about a city which has experienced important industrial crisis in many ways, the steel industry, before that also the coal mining industry, and so on and so forth. So there is this specific situation. And so what we did in this context, in the context of this research, is to try to see and to analyze different types of policies. So we focused mainly on SUD projects, but we also looked at other type of projects, and in particular I will talk about the what you mentioned, so the Urbact project titled the Roof project. So it's a network of cities. So so Urbact it's basically building networks of cities, and in order to exchange also good practices, information, and to exchange data about a specific subject. And this subject is homelessness. So the idea is to try to have a better understanding of local dynamics regarding homelessness, and also to promote the housing first, housing led approach. So we did that, and looking at these different types of projects, so the SUD projects and the Urbact project, I tried to see in what extent migrants population were actually considered as a target populations for this project. And I also tried to understand in what extent migrants or migrants organizations were involved in the implementation of this project. And here I found kind of an interesting situation. So regarding the SUD project, if we are looking at the strategy level, so let's say at the level of the development of the strategy, and also the selection of the different projects, we can see that the question of migrants population and also the question of integration is basically absent from the strategy documents we can find. So it doesn't seem to be the main focus of this project. So in this, it's a bit like the situation Marco and Nikos described before. But when you are looking at the local level, so at the level of local actors, so the actors who are responsible to, let's say, design the project, defend the project, and then implement the project, you can see that there is actually a kind of, there is an attention given to the question, if not of migrants population specifically, at least around questions of diversity, and the importance of diversity in the cities, and so on and so forth, and the knowledge, of course, of the possible impact of the projects on migrants population. So there is this kind of thematic that are quite absent at the level of the strategy, but still present in the way the local actors responsible for the implementation are talking about their project and how they try to design it and implement it. Regarding the Urbact project, it's interesting because it seems that it's the other way around, you know. So if you look at the programmatic documents regarding this roof project, so the Eurobact roof project, you can see that migrants are actually present in the document that the network is publishing. You can see that the situation of migrants and the relation between migrants population and homelessness actually appear as one of the point that is addressed by the network. So it's kind of an explicit reference. But when you are talking with local actors involved in this project, they also tell you that even if everybody in the networks knows that migrants population are have to face problem of homelessness, and the fact that the migrant population is also a population that you find related to this problematic. They also say that it's very difficult to integrate, let's say, to include migrant population both as a focus and also as a potential partner to implement project, because of a quite simple fact that at least in Liège, the homeless people who tend to have a migrant background, they are very often undocumented migrants. So from this perspective, it's very difficult to promote a housing first initiative when, I mean, it's very difficult to include this population in housing first program because there is a lack of a stable resident status, for example. So here, I think what is interesting is that there is actually here a limit in the let's say place-based project, in the sense that it's not a question of place or urban environment, but it's much more a simple question of rights, the rights of the people. So you are trying to include in the project. So yeah, basically it's what we found on Liège.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And I encourage everyone to read this excellent report to find more information, and for the specificities also to contact the authors, especially also the case of Malmo. Erika Rieger could not be with us. For the specificities of roof, I'm actually following that network closely because of Eurobact, and I'm available for further information if necessary. And without any further ado, I will give the floor to Michele Landabasso, Director of Growth and Innovation at Joint Research Center of the European Commission, for the conclusion of this seminar. And please continue asking the questions, and the speakers that have been with us, Paola Briata, Marco Cremaschi, Nikos Karamidi Trio, and Jeremy Mandan will be able to answer online. So I give you the floor to Michele Landabasso for the closing remarks. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Laura. I don't know if someone can allow my video. Yes, here. Thank you, Laura, so much. And thank you all for this very interesting discussion. And I want just to make a reflection and say a big thank you to all those that have participated today and have participated in this research strand. The Regional Studies Association, we want to join forces to continue this effort. The colleagues that were in Liège, Malmo, Venice, Paris, and London, I mean, we need to continue. I don't know under what format, but the research that you have started is something that it is worth pursuing. And I also want to thank, well, Laura, because of this moderation, and our team, Carlota, Paola, and Guido. And this is part of my responsibility to say big thank you. Let's continue this effort because it's a worthwhile one. And maybe just to share with you some reflections that I draw on myself. One is that the integration of migrants is here to stay. It's here to stay, and it is one of the policy priorities of the European Commission, as explained by our president in the last State of the Union. And it's here to stay at least for 3 reasons. I think one is out of European values. If we want to have a union of values, one of them we have to stand by is solidarity humanity, empathy, I don't know how to call it, to start with refugees, and also to understand this world that it is pushing so many people towards the union as a possible, I don't know, utopia, trying to find a better life. And with this big Rio Grande, which is the Mediterranean for us in between, with such a difference of income and conditions on the two shores. It is not enough to explain why migrant integration is so important for us. We can also talk about enlightened selfishness. We need migrants. Look at the pensions, look at the vacancies in the labor market, look at the economic situation. We need the migrants, but we need integrated migrants. And this is another reason why this is going to be here with us, why it is important we continue researching, enlightening politicians that take these decisions with good evidence and case studies, as you just did. And finally, I think there is a third reason that we all know is about populism. Populism that fights against Europe and uses migration as a as a as an argument against Europe, by the way, mainly but not only. And for all these reasons and many others, it is worth the continuation of our efforts in this field. Now, some reflections that I draw from your from this research and your comments today. One is, I remember in 2016 meeting the press with the majors of it was Rome, Athens, Berlin, Barcelona, Amsterdam, and Glasgow and Gothenburg, and Vienna. And we were also in Vienna in another occasion, the same topic. At the time, I was head of cabinet, and we had started we launched this study with the OECD precisely called the need for a territorial approach to integrate migrants. It was right after or in the middle almost of the migration wave. And one of the salient features of this research put on the table a similar conclusion to the one that you have reached, which is that social policies alone will not make it, that the local authorities, the urban authorities are in the front line, because most of the migrants will end up in cities trying to find a job and settle down, and they needed to know the figures, the tools. They needed to share experience to see how they will tackle this challenge, which was relatively not new, but in terms of the size of the problem, yes. And I think this, and by the way, just Paola and Carlota participated in this study also. So this is a line of research and effort that needs to be continued. We need to make very clear to the urban authorities that this is something they need to tackle, and that there is a territorial dimension, not only a social one, and there is also a scope for sharing good practice, to learn from each other, because no one has a silver bullet. And also we need to think about this in two ways. One is the role of local authorities in tackling the problem and empowering them to do so, as I am saying. The other one is this wicked problem, this multidisciplinary problem, multifaceted problem that requires this convening of different skills, levels of government, and tools. From training, and in the GRC, we have some interesting studies not so long ago saying that 4-6 years down the line, if migrants are properly trained, they could have a positive net fiscal result, if you want, on the economic point of side of things. And these results needs to be known and diffused widely. And we need to engage the political masters in the discussion of how to tackle this. And in that sense, I'm delighted to know that my colleagues in DG Regio and the colleagues in DG Home are participating in this effort. So anyway, thank you so much for being there, for taking this effort, and we hope to continue this in one way or the other, and see you soon. Laura, back to you.
Thank you very much. Back to Carlotta.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you, Michele. It was really interesting and promising words that you said also for the future. I want to thanks everybody who organized the conference and also the Regional Studies Association, but also all the people who participate to this very interesting research. It was indeed a very interesting project. So again, I invite you to have a look at the report. I put the link on the chat if you want to look at it. And thanks a lot, and have a nice day. Goodbye.